Hello, Manchester. Welcome once again to Ward 13. My special guest today is Maureen Mann. She's running for state representative in Rockingham District 32. And Maureen, I was telling you before the show, while we were watching Vermin, you know that the presidential primary is kicked into gear when Vermin Supreme arrives in New Hampshire.
Except I really wish he'd keep his promise about a pony to every American. I really like that.
He has to be elected first.
Yes, that's
I'm
true.
going to show a short clip. I was at the Rand Paul event. As you know, Vermin wasn't allowed in, but that's nobody allows Vermin into the events. But I was graciously allowed to attend, and I took some footage. Can you roll the footage with Rand?
That cannot target or harass citizens for their political or their religious beliefs.
Let's go. Yep, that was Rand Paul. He's the strangest combination of JFK, if I may say so. A little of JFK, the youth and that. And, you know, he doesn't have the gloss and the glamour that JFK had, who I only remember as a small child. But he's the strangest combination of JFK, if you please, and Huey Long. You remember the old populist senator that used to bedevil FDR, and another Southerner. And do you have anything to say about Rand Paul? And
Well, I think one of the differences with Huey Long is that I think Huey Long, in one sense, truly believed that and set out to help the poorest among us, the sickest among us, those who needed help. And I truly, despite the populist message, have not seen that in Rand Paul.
But the thing that's so interesting that's going on about what Rand Paul is this, I call them anarcho-libertarians, because like you said, they really want to dismantle the state. And the thing is, people don't listen to me. There's so much money coming into the state. Now, Rand Paul, Wall Street doesn't like him as much as they love my candidate, Elizabeth Warren, my non-candidate. So he is going to the Silicon Valley in California, and where there's a new breed of billionaires. This isn't Steve Jobs and Larry Ellison, who all they were interested in was money and their egos. These are people that actually believe in the Ayn Rand philosophy. You know, what is it, Atlas Shrugged philosophy. And they are funneling money into the state. They started last year, and money's coming in now. Now, I understand that you're facing a candidate that is being financed by out of state. First of all, you were a state. Tell us about who's Maureen Mann. Well,
Okay. I have served 3 terms in the past for what was previously Rockingham District 1, and after redistricting is now a floterial Rockingham 32, and it covers Candia, Northwood, Deerfield, and Nottingham. I'm a retired teacher. I'm a former small business owner. My husband owned a small business for many years. We are both now retired, which gives us a chance to be involved in our communities. So I've been a library trustee. I've been part of the cooperative extension. In fact, I received the Sherburne Award from the town of Deerfield in 2006 for service to the community. I'm very involved with transparency and food issues.
right.
I am involved in campaign finance report. I was the co-sponsor of 2 bills in the legislature last year dealing with transparency and funding. Where does the money come from?
Right,
that is funding our candidates.
Now, I was surprised on Miscellany Blue, the blog site revealed that there was a Chicago millionaire that's funneling money, or millionaire. I don't know. He's probably much more than a millionaire, but I guess he just doesn't hit nine figures. Yeah. He's funneling money into New Hampshire, but he's funneling money into your district. And it's rather surprising, isn't it?
Well,
or is it?
I would say it was surprising, except in the past when I have run Americans for Prosperity.
Oh, right.
The
AFB.
Koch brothers organization actually sent mailers out against me, not necessarily in favor of my opponent, but just basically against me. So it's not new, although this is very new.
I think there's now Tammy Simmons, once again, I ran against her for Hillsborough 17, and I lost by 42 votes in the recount. But the thing was, she was boasting at this time last year that AFP, Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch brothers, one of their foundations, which they funnel money to certain candidates, had boots on the ground in our district, which is Manchester Ward 10, in April. So you're going up against this. And interestingly, on the Miscellany Blue, when they revealed... John, can you show us the PAC, the photos from the PAC? Liberty for All. This is the PAC. And there are the two people that were at the Rand Paul rally. They were being funded by this PAC, too.
Well, I think one of the things that's happened in... I did not have a primary, but my opponent did. And Liberty for All donated over $1,300. I think it was $1,318 just in her primary election. And so I'm assuming that there's going to be further donations now that the general election is coming up on May 9th.
Can you tell us about, first of all, the woman who won the primary is 19 years old, and they managed to help finance flyers to introduce her to your district.
One of the things I would like to say is I also have people who have donated to me.
Right.
However, most of her donations have been, first the amount from Liberty for All, but from out-of-staters or people outside the area.
Right.
I think looking at the last Secretary of State's report, I think 4 or 5 people were actually in her district.
Just 4
or 5 people. My donations have been essentially 85% of them are people in the 4 towns I'm running in. Right. Small donations, $25, $50. I've had some $10 donations. Another 12 or 13% are from people with whom I served in the state legislature who are supporting my campaign to return. And then I have $100 from the NEA as a former teacher.
Right.
That's not a surprise. And $100 from what's called Aggregate the Vote. And those are different transportation organizations, because I served on Public Works and Highways for the 3 terms where I served before. I understand the importance of infrastructure. I understand how important it is that our roads are repaired, our bridges are repaired. And so I'm grateful that this organization of trucking companies and construction companies donated to my campaign, because they have confidence that I'm interested in promoting them and promoting New Hampshire businesses.
Right. I'd like to say I first met you at the GMO seminar, which I had on my show last week with the ladies, Ms. Dunwoody and Dr. Connolly. And I have to say, you're one of the most erudite people I've met. The way you would explain things and about the legislative process and everything. The point, I think, here is that you are actually a person with deep roots, experience, and legislative experience. So we could see that the contributions are something recognizing that. Whereas I would say these contributions from Liberty PAC to a 19-year-old or a 40-year-old or 50-year-old are ideologically based. Would you disagree?
No, I know really nothing about my opponent. She graduated from high school last June and is a freshman in Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts. She apparently interned for Marylinda Garcia, or she worked for Marylinda
Right.
Garcia over the summer and spent a short time interning for Kelly Ayotte. I think it's great that, first I should say, it's wonderful when young people get involved in politics. Too many younger people, college students, just don't, because they don't understand how government truly affects their lives. Although if they have student loans or are going to school in New Hampshire, which has the second most expensive in-state tuition and the highest rate of student loan debt, they ought to understand how it affects their lives.
Right.
So what they do is they are ideologues in the sense that somebody tells me this. I work for Marylinda Garcia, which is great.
Who was a candidate
Who
of
was
the
a
right.
candidate on the right.
The far
but that's
right,
what you
yes.
know.
Yeah.
And I think start out at the local level. Start out running for school board, for municipal budget committee, for select board. Become a library trustee. Find out what's really going on in your community. If you're a college student, get involved where you are so that you come to have a little understanding of what life is like for people other than yourself. My opponent started out for 2 years at a Christian school. She graduated, spent her last 2 years at Phillips Exeter Academy. It is wonderful that she comes from a family that can provide that kind of educational experience. It truly is. But there are an awful lot of people who don't have parents who can afford that. And I think it's important that you understand how those people live, a little bit about them
Right.
before. So start out locally, run for something local. Then when you've got some experience and you've spent time on the select board and had people come to you and say, I can't pay my property taxes, I'm losing my house, how can you help? When you understand with the the budget cuts now from DHHS, cutting Meals on Wheels, cutting Service Link, cutting help for the mentally ill,
How that affects the community.
understand how that affects your neighbors.
Right.
And I don't think someone who graduated from high school last June really understands that. It's great that she's involved. It's great she wants to be involved. But start out somewhere where you get human experiences.
Right. The problem with these people being financed from out of state on the basis of ideology is the ideology from what I call the anarcho-libertarians, which as much as like Rand can put this progressive spin, there were things that Pat Buchanan said about that I agreed with. Particularly, I'm against I'm with George Washington against foreign interventions.
Entanglements.
I'm a veteran.
Yeah.
And when it's you're financing ideology, this is a specific ideology about dismantling the state. We've actually had the people here in Manchester talk about there shouldn't be snow plowing. Tim Smith, who's my representative in District 17, the things that he tells us about these ideologues and their agenda is truly amazing. And the things that they say, there should be no snow plowing. I wonder what are we supposed to do? Get our snow blowers out and clean the streets. So they're financing an ideology of actually destroying the government. And you're talking about this, about human experience. Does this person understand what these type of cuts will do to the community?
Well, looking at letters to the editor she's written, she supports the House Finance Committee budget, which passed last week. I just think that budget, they did restore $50 million of the $88 million cuts to DOT. And I think that's because when you cut $88 million out of the DOT,
Oh, yes.
that's 42% of their budget. And that hits every one of us, rich, poor, no matter how you feel about government. I see the potholes. I'll see the closed bridges. I know what I won't be able to do. So everybody screamed. So in order to stop the screaming of Republicans and Democrats and everybody, they restored $50 million to the DOT, but they did it by taking it out of education. Which is going to hit every single town in this state when that stabilization money doesn't come back to my 4 small towns or to Manchester or to big cities. There are a couple of options. You can, in my small towns where we have meetings, you can have a whole new, call a meeting and try to renegotiate with service providers, for instance, for kids with special needs, for people who provide supplies to the school, renegotiate the teacher's contract, which is going to cost a lot of money if it's successful, or in order to meet obligations towns have already made in terms of contracts, supplies, what they've done, it's going to fall down back on the local property taxpayers. And people who rent sometimes say, well, that doesn't affect me. It certainly affects you.
Yes, it does.
Because your landlord's paying those property taxes, and that's going to be reflected in your rent. And so the downshifting to communities for these $50 million taken from education to be put in the DOT, and there's still a $30 million cut to DOT.
This Republican budget, this radical Republican budget that is just going to cut social services and infrastructure and the funding, they're attacking once again the university. And I'd just like to say, the Nashua Mayor, Donnelly Loiseau, who's a Republican, has expressed she's very concerned with how these budget cuts are going to affect the city of Nashua, because the costs are going to be downshifted to the city. And I don't have the exact formula, but for every certain amount of budget cuts up in Concord, the Nashua property tax rate will go up 1%. Why is that, Maureen?
I don't actually understand the finances in Nashua because, of course, I represent 4 small towns in Rockingham County.
But you're going to be affected, too.
Everybody is going to be affected. There are sort of 3 broad categories of cuts. The cuts to the DOT, which originally were $88 million, and now $50 million of that has been replaced by cuts to education.
Right.
So both of those are going to have the effect of downshifting. The decision that was made is they will continue 93, but the 6 betterment districts in the state, which are, so the smaller state roads, for instance, are taken care of by the 6 betterment districts, and towns and cities. 12% of that money was going back to cities and towns to work on local roads. More of it was going back to betterment districts. That $38 million is gone now. So you have potholes, you'll keep potholes.
Unless the city or town pays for them.
Precisely. And one of the things that the DOT is doing in some small bridges, and for instance, if a town wants to take, the DOT will close them, or the town has the option to take them over. So that's one source of funds. But because of the $50 million that was taken out of education, in order to restore some of the cuts to DOT, that's a major downshift to the towns. Property taxes are the biggest burden. The biggest burden of everyone's property taxes is the cost of the schools.
Right. Now, Nashua is going to follow through with cuts to the school budget. It's right here. Nashua mayor's concerned, and they're going to make up at the shortfall that's going to come from the state, which they're anticipating, where Manchester's mayor, I don't think he's anticipating anything but, being reelected on whatever he can. They're going to cut the schools in Nashua because of this.
But you can't just sort of, in one sense you can say, all right, I'm going to cut 1%. But where do you find that 1%? Contracts with suppliers have already been signed.
Right.
Providers of special education services or out-of-school town placements have been done. You have teachers' contracts. Those will all have to be renegotiated And it's not that simple to just say, I'm going to cut X amount from the budget.
Right.
You have to figure out where you can cut it and if you can cut it. And then the third thing, of course, are the DHHS cuts.
Well, can I ask you one
Sure.
thing about those? It seems like the recklessness up in Concord, spearheaded by what I call the anarcho-libertarian wing of the party, the Liberty Alliance part of the people. They're reckless. Are they actually endangering like federal matching funds with these cuts?
There is something like $73 million just in matching funds that will be lost to DHHS.
The Department of Health and Human Services.
Health and Human Services. Never mind the money that will be lost for transportation, because much of the transportation projects are 80-20 cuts, 80% from the federal government, 20. But DHHS, what people don't understand is, by law, by RSA 165, dating back to 1966, by law, towns are responsible for all kinds of things to take care of people that
under
now the state, by law, has said they would do, and are just abandoning it. Meals on Wheels, emergency shelters, homeless shelters.
That's fascinating.
Poor
law dating back from when this was English North America. And I'll never forget in 2011 when the anarcho-libertarians went after the poor law, tried to strike it down, because it's the poor law that the towns have a responsibility to the poor, the disabled, the people that need help. That is part of the founding fathers of New Hampshire credo, is it not?
It is, and it is going to have a major impact with these cuts on cities and towns. Just look at $6 million in cuts to nursing homes.
My God.
Are we going to close county nursing homes? And we can't. I mean, we cannot do that, which means that money is going to have to be picked up by local property taxes. I don't think people really pay that much attention to their county taxes, but they're going to have to start paying attention, because with cuts to school funding, cuts to DOT funding, cuts to county funding, that's going to have a major effect on the property taxes of every person in this state. So it's easy to say, cut taxes, cut funding, but this is going to hit every single one of us.
When I was running for office, I pointed out quite rightly, I believe, that after the first Tea Party government, when they won that incredible majority from 2010 to the end of 2011, they slashed the university funding by 50%. They slashed infrastructure. And is it a coincidence that suddenly population growth to New Hampshire suddenly flatlined? Is it a coincidence that suddenly businesses were no longer relocating here, and some businesses went back to Massachusetts? You need infrastructure and education, particularly higher education, to create like incubators to attract new businesses. We live, Manchester is 55 miles away from Boston, which The Economist, the conservative English news magazine, said 7th most dynamic economy in the world. And you wonder, why aren't we like Seattle is to the Silicon Valley? These budget cuts, the school system that's so radically decayed under the Manchester tax cap. And it's quite incredible. When I campaigned, I said, we can't afford another round of these cuts because it will be economically disastrous to this state. Would you agree?
I do agree. And the other thing I'd like to point out is in 2010, with that veto-proof majority in both the House and the Senate, even though we had a Democratic governor, and all the talk about cut taxes, the only tax that was cut was the increase in the cigarette tax was rolled back. That was their opportunity with a veto-proof majority. If they really wanted to cut taxes and change the state, they would have done it. But they know, in fact, businesses don't want tax cuts any more than average citizens do, because we know we barely fund this state now. We have no sales tax. We have no income tax. So what we do is we nickel and dime people with fees.
Right.
and you start cutting those fees, like, for instance, the cut now in the rooms and meals tax in this recent budget. That money, a lot of it goes back to the cities and towns.
Right.
So if we reduce the meals and rooms tax, that money's not going back to cities and towns. And businesses understand that. Restaurants understand that we need a vibrant economy here to attract tourists. If our roads are filled with potholes, people aren't coming here skiing. If we have constant construction, people aren't coming here to go to Lake Winnipesaukee or wherever in the summer. And reasonable people understand that. It's the philosophical thing about cut taxes, cut spending, without regard to the consequences that seems to be taking over in our society.
What is the critical thing in the election you're facing?
I think the critical thing in this election is who gets to vote on the budget. The election will take place on May 19th, and it'll be one more vote for cuts to the DOT, cuts to counties, cuts to towns if my opponent wins. It will be one more vote for no regulations of guns. It will be one more vote for eliminating Common Core, and there are problems with Common Core or with smarter balance. But to have a philosophy that all education should be totally local is a disaster in terms of preparing our kids for the future and a disaster in terms of what it would do to property taxes. If, on the other hand, you want someone who has experience in our community, 10 years ago I started a newspaper that covers the 4 towns that I had previously represented and represent. I know those towns. I have been involved in activities in all those towns. I believe that we as human beings have some responsibility to care for the weakest among us, those who need the most help. Certainly there can be efficiencies in government, but there's a huge difference between efficiency and nastiness to poor people. And that's where we are.
Yeah. I'd also like to point out, as Tim Smith told me, constituent services. Now, Tim is very much helping people navigate the system and everything. And I have to tell you, if you are an anarcho-libertarian Republican and you don't believe in the services, let's be honest, constituent services is not going to be high on your list, is it?
That's one of the things I am most proud of. In the terms I served, I sponsored legislation at the request of people in all 4 of the communities I represent. I sponsored legislation at the request of the select boards in the communities I represent. Often to get that passed, I worked with a Republican state senator, and the biggest thing I did was get a stoplight at a dangerous intersection which kids had to go through to get to school.
Jon, can you show the slide of Maureen where you can go? You have a Facebook page, and what's it called?
Maureen Mann, New Hampshire State Representative.
Oh, okay. And we also have maureenmann.blogspot.com where they can go, and you have posts and
it's pretty clear where I stand.
Okay.